Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I am your co-host Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Judy, tell folks the title of today's episode.
Healthy Conflict, Happy Couple, an interview with Lisa Gray.
And we just finished that interview, and she was delightful. It was
Yes, she
really
is.
nice. And, you know, it's one of those things, of course, I'm always looking for this anyway, but there were so many overlaps with the way she conceptualizes her work and the way I like to think about stuff.
Exactly.
So it's like, oh, I kept noticing all these,
yeah, all
interesting.
the simpatico stuff there going on with the two of you.
Yeah, she's doing really interesting work, and through her own experience, and you'll see when you do the interview, she used to be an air traffic controller. I mean, wow, what a crucible to come out of,
Right.
and then become a couples therapist.
Well.
It's really cool. So
She's used to stress
and
conflict.
and astonishingly, she seems like a really nice person.
She does, and very calm.
Very,
too.
yes, right. So anyway, I hope you'll enjoy that interview. We certainly enjoyed it. But before we go there, let's talk about some of the stuff we've been doing and stuff that
Okay.
we'd like you to know about.
All right. what should
Starting
we-
with,
it's not about communication. Why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong.
now that's the most recent of my two big books on the subject.
Yes.
And that is available anywhere books are sold, and also available as an audiobook where I did the narration for that. And that actually dovetails nicely with what we talked about. It came up in our conversation. You'll see that
Yes,
when
it
you
did.
watch or hear the interview.
Yes, we won't spoil it.
We won't spoil it, yes. And also the book that started this whole podcast, really.
Right. Reigniting the spark. Why stable relationships lose intimacy and how to get it back.
Also available anywhere books are sold in all of the various formats you would like. And if you sign up for my newsletter, which I've been doing just about once a month, it's not on a fixed schedule, but if you do that, we will give you a reward. This sounds like a public radio fundraiser. We're not
it
even
does.
raising funds here,
No.
folks, but we'll give you a reward, and
Yes.
you'll have to buy the tote bag. We'll talk about the tote bags in a minute. But this is the reward you will get. Actually, not the book that Judy is holding for those of you watching it, but it is.
Yes.
She's got the right book there, but not that book itself,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the PDF
The
of that
PDF
book.
of this
We're not
book.
giving away. I'm not spending money on you, folks. Cheap that I am. But if you sign up for my newsletter, Dr.
Yes,
Chalmers
you get a free
newsletter,
PDF of 7 words to jumpstart your love life.
which is a nice little sort
Booklet.
of compact compendium
Yes.
of all the ideas that I have that relate to jumpstarting your love life, which is a thing that a lot of people want to do. And so you've got some tips in there.
That's right. And you were talking about tote bags and giveaways.
Yes,
we don't
we've
give
got merch.
those away, but we do have
We have
our
merch.
our couples therapy in 7 words merch. We have these beautiful mugs in the 11 and 15 ounce sizes with our logo on one side and our motto, be kind, don't panic, and have faith, on the other side.
just what you need for your favorite
Lovely
beverages.
red, white, and black colors
Yes.
for those of you who are listening.
And the tote bag
The
that Judy
tote
mentioned, a
bags.
beautiful tote bag that has the same logo on one side and motto on the other. And we use it all the time, our tote
All
bags.
the time.
We're toting them around a lot. If you ever see somebody carrying those tote bags, it's probably us. But if you buy them, by golly, that could be you too. So let's put in a word for our sponsor.
Okay, our sponsor, The Blue Tent, Erotic Tales from the Bible by Laria Zilber.
And the sales for that have been actually ticking up quite nicely, especially since it got written up. I mean, it was an ad, but it got written up in Hadassah Magazine.
Right, in their book section.
In their book section. And we happen to be recording this on the first day of Hanukkah.
Yes.
The Blue Tent makes a great Hanukkah gift. It makes a great Christmas gift.
Yes,
it
it
makes a
does.
great gift for Kwanzaa. It even makes a great gift for Festivus, so that you can air your grievances and have erotic tales at the same time.
There you go.
For people who are into that kind of sex, that's kinky stuff right there. So for any of your favorite holidays, the Blue Tent makes an ideal gift, and we hope you will
Absolutely.
go there. And you should go to Laria Zilber, LARIAZYLBER, LariaZilber.com, and you'll have all the information there as to how to acquire those books, or just search for it on
Right.
Amazon.
And it's available in paperback and Kindle and audio version. And I do the audio.
Yep.
narration.
And I will also note we would like you to let folks know about our podcast by reviewing us and rating us and doing all that kind of stuff, and just tell folks about it on your favorite social media.
That's right. You're our best advertisements.
Absolutely. And so, without further ado, we'll get into our interview with Lisa Gray, and we will see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Lisa Gray. Lisa is a couples therapist in private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area, specializing in high conflict couples and chronic illness and pain. After working as an air traffic controller for 10 years and serving as a peer debriefing counselor for fellow controllers, Lisa decided to go back to school to study counseling. She graduated from John F. Kennedy University in 2004 with a master's degree in clinical counseling and has been working in the field ever since. Lisa is passionate about teaching couples to practice healthy conflict so that their relationships can thrive and grow. Lisa reviews self-help books on her Instagram, Therapy Book Nook. She lives in the Bay Area with her family and 3 large dogs. Lisa, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you.
Wow, air traffic controller.
Yeah, I joke that I used to have a job where everyone did what I say, and now I have a job where no one does what I say.
I hadn't thought of it that way. I was thinking more like you used to have a job where people were in constant stress, and now you just work with couples who are in the midst of difficulties.
Yeah, it's very similar, actually. Yes.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, we always like to start off by asking our guests, how did you get into this work? And of course, your intro said some of that, but tell us something about your own journey into what you do.
Yeah, so I did the peer debriefing for air traffic. And if people are familiar with the critical incident stress debriefing model, what they do is team a peer debriefer up with a mental health professional. So I was kind of the one who spoke the air traffic language, and then they'd pair me up with a mental health professional. And I always loved talking to the mental health professionals, and I loved the process of doing the critical incident stress debriefings. And then I had kids. And 2 air traffic controllers raising kids doesn't work very well because there's midnight shifts and, just general shift work. So I decided to stay home, and I hated doing that. So I was not cut out to be a stay-at-home mom. So my husband just said, you liked that counseling stuff. Why don't you go back to school and do that? So I did. Yeah.
Perfect.
Wow. Yeah, that's neat.
So the 2 of you were air traffic controllers.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
I had this image when you said that of your kids as blips on a screen that you were just keeping track of,
Yes. It was kind of like that at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things you focus on is conflict, which is fascinating, and you describe it as a skill. And I'm, of course, in doing couples therapy, I'm often recognizing that that's an important skill to have. Please tell us about that. How did you come into that way of thinking of things?
Well, so often people are telling me I'm just not good at conflict, like as if they think that it's a temperament or a character trait, or maybe you're just born with it. I don't know. But really, it is just a skill like any other skill. It's just that we don't get any training on how to develop that skill. Like there's no class in high school. There's no formal education on conflict management. There's just kind of what you saw your parents doing maybe, or your caregivers doing, whether that was healthy or not healthy, and then your own experiences having conflict with other people and just kind of winging it and seeing if that worked or didn't work. So we just kind of fall into these patterns. So I think that people then get the impression that they're not good at conflict, but actually you develop the conflict just like you develop every other you develop the skill just like you develop every other skill, which is obtaining the information and then practice.
Yeah. It's interesting when in my books, one of the things couples therapy in 7 words, our 7 words are be kind, don't panic, and have faith.
Yeah.
And to have faith, I describe faith as I describe it. It's not like religion or a particular set of beliefs. It is actually a skill that you have to practice. And it's a mindset that you learn to practice.
Yeah.
And I can imagine it. Oh, well, I like to think, because it's my favorite, it's my favorite way of thinking, that it overlaps a lot with how you would practice conflict and not freak out completely. I'm curious, how do you do that? How do you help people do that?
Well, I think the first thing that you have to do is convince people that practicing conflict is something that they want to do.
Mhm.
Because we don't have the education and because conflict has been so painful for so many people, that's the last thing that they want to hear is that I should do that more. I should practice that more. So I think like first you have to kind of help them with the attitudes and the mindsets that would help them to understand how conflict really works. You also have to teach them how to manage their body, how to manage their bodily reaction, because physiological reactions get in the way so often of having good conflict. So
Mm.
there's kind of some foundational pieces that happen first before you start kind of getting into, okay, and then here's how you practice the conflict.
So how does
Yeah.
conflict work?
Well, so I wrote a book called Healthy Conflict, Happy Couple. And I have this 3-step process that I do in the book. So the first step is the setup. So I feel like most conflict happens when you're already mad, which is a very bad idea. So
Mhm.
it's like, the only time couples are ever talking about what their issues are is when they're already in a fight about it. And so the first step is I'm trying to get them to set up conflict conversations in advance. Most couples, they know what their conflicts are. I mean, I ask any couple, they can tell me what it is that they argue about. It's
Mhm.
finances or it's the in-laws or whatever. And so what I want them to do is to say something like, hey, I'd love to talk about our recent issues that we've had with finances. What would be a good time for you? And to have the other person say, how about tomorrow night after dinner? And then no one's ambushing anyone. They both know they're going to have this conversation. They both know what the topic is. They can have some time to think about what they want to say about that topic. And that's the first step. And I think it's really crucial because,
Yeah.
yeah,
That is so interesting. Because a lot of times I think when you say conflict to folks, they assume you mean when they're mad.
yes,
That if
yeah,
they're not mad, it's not a conflict. And
yeah,
what you're pointing out is certainly no, there's all kinds of differences
hmm,
that go up to the level of conflict in the sense of that where they're significant. It's like, wow, we better work this out because it's causing an issue if we don't work it out.
yeah.
But you don't have to be mad to do that.
Right. And
Yeah.
you'll get this argument, why would I want to have a conflict conversation like on a perfectly good Saturday morning when I'm not already mad? Why would I ever want to do that? And
Yeah.
I just sort of say it's kind of like credit cards, like you can pay now or you can pay later, but you're going to pay, So like it's not like if you don't have this conversation on Saturday morning, you're never going to have to go through that. You're just going to do it when you're mad and it's not going to be productive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's such
Yeah.
a great distinction, that you can have the notion of conflict that doesn't immediately mean being mad. And
Right.
actually, there's another distinction that occurs to me that I sometimes have made, not a whole lot with couples. Occasionally it comes up. It was more like when I used to work with adolescents,
Mhm.
this would come up because they wouldn't necessarily recognize this. You do realize you can be mad without being horrible.
Right.
There's that
Yes.
distinction as well. You can be
Yeah.
mad and still respectful.
Hmm. Yeah,
You
and
can feel the anger.
anger,
Yeah.
yeah, and anger is one of those emotions that I feel like people feel like they have to behave according to the feeling if they have it.
Yeah.
Not all feelings are like that, but anger seems to be like that. Like if I feel angry, I have to act angry, and that's just not true. Yeah.
And I guess a lot of sex therapists that have also brought up the same thing, that if you're having problems with sex, you don't want to wait till you're in the bed to talk about it. You want to find a neutral place to talk about it.
Absolutely.
You don't, you're not
Right.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that would fall in the same thing that, I would just consider that another conflict that a couple might have, that they would use my model to talk about. And they would start by setting up the conversation. And then I have a 2-step conversation that happens. So I find that couples, when they then sit down to have the conflict conversation, most of my couples move way too fast into problem solving. They're
Mm,
trying to
yep.
solve the problem
Yep.
before they even understand each other, So I make my couples split those into 2 completely separate conversations to avoid the temptation,
Yeah. That's
So
so interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
What do
the
they
first
have?
conversation is just to understand each other. So
Uh-huh.
no problem solving allowed, no brainstorming allowed, nothing like that. The first conversation is just that speaker listener model where it's like, I tell you how I'm feeling. You read back to me what I said, not what you think about what I said, but what I said, until I know that you understand me and you can say something validating if it's true. And then we switch places. You tell me exactly how you feel. I read it back, ask questions, read it back until I know that I understand how you're feeling about the topic, validate you if I can, and then we stop. We
Yeah.
stop the conversation.
I have so often said to couples, yeah, don't leap to solving the problem too quickly, because they're not crazy. They want to do that because it reduces anxiety.
Right.
Yes,
Trouble is if they're apt to skip over the actual differences. It's one of my
absolutely.
slogans is get to the right argument.
Mhm.
And a lot of
Yes.
times when they start, they don't know what the right argument is.
No.
That can be very scary, actually, to get to the right argument, or it can be a relief. It's like,
Uh-huh.
oh, that's what we're worried about. Oh, no problem. Or,
Right.
oh boy, that's what we're worried about. We're in trouble.
Mhm,
What I talk about is what I call the oh shit moment.
mhm.
The oh shit moment. It's not I just hit my thumb with a hammer. It's, oh shit, no wonder we're having this problem.
Mhm.
Now I understand what your issue is, and I understand
Yes.
why I have a problem with it. But
Yeah.
at least we know where we're coming from here.
Right. And that's such a great point, because if you don't get to that oh shit moment, then you're trying to solve a problem and really all you have is two options for solution. You have like my solution and your solution, right? But once you get to that moment, there's so many other solutions that open up, because now I get what you're saying.
Yes.
I get what your problem really is, and I wouldn't have come up with a solution that addressed that until I actually know what that is, right?
Yeah, and that's, when you have an intimate conversation, which is what I would define that as,
Mhm.
two people not freaking out, tolerating the anxiety. That's in our podcast. I've suggested a drinking game, and whenever I say tolerate the anxiety, if somebody takes a drink, they'll be drunk by the end of the podcast.
Yes,
But in
exactly.
any case, if they tolerate the anxiety of intimacy in that way,
Mhm.
take a shot, honey.
Take a
Yeah.
shot.
Mhm.
If they tolerate the anxiety of intimacy that way, then they actually form a joint mind.
Mhm.
They're each going to think of things neither one would have thought of by themselves, and that's what growth is. That's how that
Mhm.
happens. And not to sugarcoat, because also sometimes that means, oh my God, we may not be compatible with each other, which is a scary
Right.
possibility. But if you don't
Mhm.
face that, then you're not going to get anywhere. And usually that turns out, no, they're fine. They just need to
Mhm.
understand each other better.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like tolerating the anxiety is kind of a skill too. Like you might have to build up to it, and that's kind of where managing your body comes in. It's like if you feel yourself getting flooded by that feeling, it's okay to take a break under
Mhm.
certain, parameters, of course. But, learning how to like manage your own body in that moment too is very important. Otherwise, you're gonna not be able to follow the model because you're too flooded to do it.
You know the Gottman's trick of having people wear pulse oximeters.
Yeah.
And actually, I had never met, and not that I've interviewed that many people specifically trained in Gottman, but a few weeks ago we interviewed
did.
Heidi Sauter, I think
Uh-huh.
is who it was.
Yeah, yeah.
And she's a Gottman trained person, and she actually does that with folks. She actually
Oh.
has them, put on pulse oximeters, and when the pulse rate exceeds, I think it's 100 for regular people and 80 for
Mhm.
athletes.
Yeah.
That okay, you're getting flooded, take a break, because
Right.
there's no point. A lot of your
Mhm.
neocortex is now offline. There's no point.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like for high conflict couples specifically, that's actually a really good tool, because there's usually like an audible sound or some sort of a chime or something that, they don't have to call a timeout. It's like when you hear that sound, there is a timeout, right? So even if you're not using an oximeter, you can create rules. Like if someone calls someone a name, that's like an automatic timeout. Or if someone, there's certain things that can indicate, like you don't have to even have a discussion. When that's happening, it's time to take a little break,
How do you keep people from freaking out?
You mean just in general, like as they're having the
Like if they're
conversation?
like arguing,
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that I talk about in my book is that, like most body calming techniques that people use, you're not going to be able to access that in an argument if you never do it otherwise.
Mhm.
It's sort of like you can't drop into your breath in a really horrible argument if you've never done that as a regular practice. And so some of the things about managing your own body, it's like developing practices that you do on a regular basis so that you're so familiar with being able to calm yourself down that when it happens in an argument and you need to calm yourself down, you can quickly kind of go to that place,
Mhm.
And so there's different techniques for whether or not you're doing it in the middle of an argument or whether you're doing it like in a timeout. So in the middle of an argument, things like breathing and pausing and things like that can really work. Or even like tapping left and right on your legs or snapping your fingers, something bilateral. But if you're taking a break and you need to calm down, you can, take a cold. You can, so I have clients that like to clean when they take a timeout because cleaning calms them down. I don't really understand that, but hey, whatever works for you. Walk around the block, get some fresh air, sing a song you love, whatever it is that can kind of calm down your physiology.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, the big sort of catch-22 in all of that is to follow any rules. You have to be not freaked out enough to remember to follow the rules or to be motivated to follow the rules. So a lot of it is about practicing beforehand so that you don't tend to get to that point.
Yes, exactly.
Point is sort of, your amygdala is firing like crazy, and it's going to be a little while. Well, Jill Bolte Taylor's stuff. She's the one. She had My Stroke of Insight. That was her famous.
Oh yeah.
She talks about that when she was without her left hemisphere for a long time, having had a stroke, she didn't have the capability of getting mad the way she did when she got it back. It was interesting. That's left hemisphere stuff mostly. Left hemisphere amygdala. And she said she discovered it's about 90 seconds, about a minute and a half. When you start freaking out, if you don't keep reciting how pissed off you are, then you'll probably calm down in about a minute and a half. So telling people that is helpful because it gives them a little bit of perspective. It's like, it's only a minute and a half. We don't have to even go to separate rooms. If we can wait a minute and a half, chances are we'll be able to carry on.
Right. It's just about buying yourself some time, Yeah. I also like to have my clients write down, maybe on a little laminated sheet or whatever, what their calming techniques are for themselves. Because like you're saying, once you get into that place, you can't remember all the things you were going to do to calm yourself down. But if you kind of have it written down, you're like, okay, when I feel this, I'm going to follow this list. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. And sometimes that helps people who kind of lose contact with that part of their brain once they hit a certain point to have it written down. Yeah.
The thing about conflicts, it's interesting. When I saw your material, I was thinking about, there's a famous Talmudic dictum that says a machlochet l'shem shamayim, a argument for the sake of heaven will endure. An argument not for the sake of heaven will not endure. Now, what do they mean?
I love that.
Yeah, they're saying that basically there's some arguments that are worth having for their own sake. They're good arguments. It's like, this is a good thing to contend on. And the Talmud is full of arguments. It records all of the different arguments because it gives them all respect.
Yes.
There are the arguments they're saying, no, this one just is not helping anybody. And how do you help a couple distinguish between those?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a whole section in my book called "Should You Argue?" And it's dicey because you don't want to give the conflict avoiders another excuse not to argue. They're like, oh, great, I don't have to argue, and really the motivation behind that is they just don't want to have a conflict. But you're absolutely correct that there are some things that, people are arguing over that just, as you guys are married, it's like sometimes you just need to let stuff go, And so I think kind of where I'm at is this a theme, or is someone just having a bad day? So it's kind of like we all have bad days, and having some mercy towards each other or forgiveness toward each other for like small things is a beautiful quality to have. So, I tell people sometimes, if my husband does something one time and it annoys me, I'm like, okay, maybe he's just having a bad day. But then if I notice it a second time and I'm annoyed again, I think, okay, this is maybe now developing into a theme, but then if we are having that conflict, we're having the conflict about the theme, not about the dish on the sink or whatever the irritant is. So it's kind of, sometimes it does take a little bit of skill and practice to determine, is this something that I should, just be gentle with my partner about and let go? Or is this a theme that is really going to turn into a resentment or a larger issue? And then we should be talking about it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that ability, or it's not even an ability, but that condition that would let someone incline toward mercy, incline toward goodwill,
Yeah.
It's that's the metaphor of the emotional bank account. It's like
Mhm.
you need a nice big store of goodwill in there, and then a
Yeah.
lot of those little annoyances don't
Mhm.
even rise to the level of annoyances if there's lots of goodwill. It's like I don't. Well, of course, you never
Mhm.
annoy me, but I annoy Judy constantly, and she's wonderful about it. I have to say, she
Yeah.
certainly more than you annoy me, which is like
Well,
never.
that's true.
And but look, I'm being slightly silly, but that silliness is based in that notion of goodwill. That
Mhm.
I don't see stuff as annoyances because I so appreciate you,
Mm.
And when
Mhm.
a couple has that store of goodwill,
Yeah.
then still there will still be differences that
Mhm.
have to be worked out, but they won't even necessarily be annoyances. They'll just be differences.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
a great point because actually making those deposits, making emotional deposits and positivity in your relationship is actually part of your conflict management plan.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, so it's
Absolutely.
kind of like when people hear like healthy conflict, they're only thinking about the argument part, but actually part of the whole totality of having healthy conflict in your relationship is a lot of deposits, a
Yeah.
lot of good stuff happening. Because to your point, if you have tons of good stuff going on, you're not going to have as many
Oh yeah.
conflicts,
And
period.
the book I'm working on now, actually, the working title is Betrayal, Faith, and Forgiveness. And the reason I note
Ooh.
betrayal in this context is I've worked with folks where they're so overdrawn in that account that
Mhm.
a simple oversight is
Yeah.
perceived not merely as an annoyance, but as a betrayal. And I've heard people use that word.
Hmm.
Oh my God, he forgot that again. He's betrayed me. He lied
Yeah.
to me that he would do it. Well, he didn't
Hmm.
lie, he just forgot.
Yeah.
And that's what they would have thought had
Hmm.
there been a store of goodwill going on. If said, well,
Hmm.
that was annoying that you forgot. And the guy would have said, like I so often say,
Hmm.
well, sorry, I forgot. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
like an indictment of anybody's character. It's like, oh geez, that's annoying. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't cause any problems. It's like
Hmm.
it's just what it is.
Yeah.
But when there's that that overdraw,
Hmm.
there's lots of
Yeah.
penalties to be paid, and that anything turns into a huge problem.
Absolutely. And yeah, I feel like couples come in thinking, well, we used to have good communication and now we don't. And I always say, like, no, you used to have $1 million in the bank and now you don't.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
It's not your communication really probably hasn't changed all that much. It's just you used to, have a lot more going in the positive
Oh
sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between healthy and unhealthy conflict?
Yes, I mean, like we've been discussing, I think unhealthy conflict usually happens when you're already mad. And because you're already mad, you're physiologically overstimulated. And then you're going to use kind of the cognitive errors that you would hear about in CBT. You're going to start labeling each other. You're going to start thinking in black and white terms. You're going to discount the positive and think only about the negative. You're going to, if you're really far along, you're going to call each other names and say you always do this or you never do this, so it's kind of like a lot of damage gets done in an unhealthy conflict that's just not necessary. If you learn to have a healthy conflict, you can have the same conversation without the hurtful parts,
Mm,
you know.
yeah.
Mhm.
You know Ian Leslie's book on conflict? It came out a year or two ago.
No.
I don't know much about his work. He's more of a journalist. He's not like a therapist or anything.
Oh, okay.
And
Mhm.
the book itself was written, I think, especially for the business market. But I really enjoyed it. It was
Mhm.
fascinating. What he wrote about was how necessary conflict is in all kinds of relationships. He
Mhm.
mentioned couples, but he was also talking about, therapists with difficult clients, and he was talking about the correction system, and he was talking about, um, law enforcement officers interviewing people who do not want to give them information that they want to get, like interviewing
Yep.
a terrorist suspect and things like that.
Mhm.
So it was fascinating. One of the things I really enjoyed, I think it's why I quoted him. My most recently published book is called "It's Not About Communication," because
Yes,
it's really
indeed.
you're good at communicating. The problem is what you're communicating.
Mhm.
That he points out that whatever rules you have, and they're all like all the rules we've been talking about, they're good rules.
Mhm.
Whatever rules you have, it's trumped essentially by being genuine. And he gave this
Mhm.
great example of a guy in a sergeant in a police setting, and this one guy who was his superior officer was describing this particular sergeant, and he's saying, and the guy who was telling the story was all about ways of de-escalating. He's all the rules for ways of de-escalating. So he told this one story of this guy. He said, so I'm the guy telling the story. I'm sitting there with this young man who's done a suicidal gesture and trying to convince him, gently, but, compassionately to come to the hospital. The sergeant comes in and says, look, what do you want to do? You want us to, we haven't got time for this. Do you want to come with us or not? And the kid goes. So the guy telling the story is thinking, oh no, he's blowing it. The kid goes with him. And what the guy telling the story was, and that's what always happens with this guy. And he wasn't saying all his rules are bad rules. He was saying it depends on the person. And there's something about it, because there was something in this gruff guy's affect that was projecting genuine care.
Yeah.
He wasn't taking any shit, but he was projecting genuine care. And
Right.
people would pick that up. And so there's something about that that's sort of, whatever procedures we have, if what you're showing, well, maybe it's related to that store of goodwill, if you're showing genuine compassion and genuine openness, even if you're being gruff.
Yeah. Well, and partners, Jen, and when we're talking about couples, you know your partner's personality. So it's like, if they're being genuine or not being genuine in that way. Yeah.
Certainly, and that, of course, that comes up in the domain of sex when we talk about, with sex therapy. The idea, the couples that strive for all the great rules of communication so that they can be really careful about how they talk to each other, they do great, except in the area of sex, where it tends to be really boring. The couples that are willing to, again, it's a tricky balance, because they're not talking about being jerks, but the couples that are willing to be who they are in those moments, even if it's not exactly politically correct, tend to have a lot livelier sex lives.
Yeah. So then I was going to tell you guys too about the third step in the conflict is also then it's the problem solving conversation,
Yes.
And I think, so what I do with my couples is, after they've had this conversation where they fully understand each other, I want them to come to the problem solving conversation with at least 5 potential solutions. So they each come with at least, because what it is normally is there's my solution and your solution. I want them, now that they understand each other, to come up with at least 5. And so they can be from the ridiculous to the, I give this example in my book, like if your problem is laundry, like I can do the laundry, you can do the laundry, we can pay someone to do the laundry, we can throw away our clothes when they get dirty, like just like a bunch of different potential solutions. And then
There's
they
elves
each
too. Don't forget the elves.
right, exactly. That's who I want to do my laundry. And then, they each get 1 veto if they have at least 5. So 1 that they're just not even going to discuss. And then they just talk through each potential solution. What would that be like? What would the downside be? How would I feel? How would you feel? And so just having a nice, kind of back and forth about each and every solution. And then sometimes a solution just naturally emerges, or sometimes it comes down to like, okay, we kind of like these 2. Let's pick this one. Let's do it for 2 weeks. And then let's have this discussion again, see how it went. And if it wasn't perfect, we'll try the second one, so just kind of like, but that conversation is usually pretty fun, but as long as you come with more than just 2 solutions, because then you're just back to the original argument.
That's a great idea. It's interesting. Yeah. Expand and including the ridiculous is a great idea, I think, just because it lightens the whole thing. You're describing, of course, 2 people having a conversation who are not freaking out, who have goodwill toward each other, who want what they want, but also acknowledge that there's validity in what the other person wants. That's what it looks like. And then you don't need rules for how they can communicate. They're going to be fine. They'll do what they do.
But you have to get them there.
You have to get them there. Yes, that's steps 1 and 2. You have to get them there. Yeah. Then, of course, there are those conflicts where the solution is to realize, oh my God, there isn't a good solution here.
Correct.
Can you address some of that?
Yeah. So like, if I want to have a baby and you don't, or I want to move to Oklahoma and you don't, I mean, someone is going to get 100% of their way in a solution to those problems. There isn't such a thing as a compromise. And so again, I feel like the process still works in those situations, in the sense of, if you're having that conversation in a calm space, and you've had the conversation where you really and truly understand each other, then you're going to be able to sit down and say, okay, there may be only two solutions here. But again, even that solution conflict has more options than you might think, right? So, okay, I'm willing to have a child, but we have to have a nanny, or okay, I'm willing to move to Oklahoma as long as you take X amount of weeks off to be, or we spend summers here, or, so I think you can still expand those conversations. And I think people get stuck in the black and white of it.
Yeah.
And even though there may not be a solution that's a true compromise for both people, I still think you can, if you go through the process and have enough goodwill, you can find ways that both people's, the book Getting to Yes.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So you can still find a solution that meets people's needs, even if it doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
But you have to go through the process. Yeah.
Yes, of course. And, it is interesting because with respect to the Getting to Yes thing, it comes up in this context too. There are folks, there are things that are simply deal breakers. In other words, there are situations where the solution is that we split up. And it's just
absolutely
painful, but sometimes that's what happens. And the Getting to Yes thing is interesting in that kind of context, because if they don't agree on that, then it's the sort of mediation approach that's embodied in the Getting to Yes idea. I'm spacing out on those authors' names. Remember
William Ury is one of them.
Yes.
I can't remember the other one. Yeah, but those are great books. Getting to Yes and Getting Past No. Yeah.
Yeah. But they only work in a context where at least the parties agree that they want to agree, because then there are situations where you don't have that possibility.
Yeah.
It's just going to make something happen even though the other one doesn't want. People can file. I'm glad we live in a culture, and of course I'm old enough to remember. I don't know. I'm 6 years older than Judy. I'm not sure this was true when in your memory or not, because the changes happened in the 70s. Before it was possible to get a divorce if your partner didn't agree to it, or if you didn't prove something horrible, adultery or cruelty or something like that, or violence or something like that. Now it is much more possible in any state if someone wants a divorce, they can get one.
Yeah. And
so that sometimes if they can't agree on what they're agreeing on, sometimes that's which is painful.
Yeah. I kind of come from a space that if a couple's coming to me, I'm going to try to help them save their relationship. But I also understand that not every relationship can be saved or should be.
Yeah. Right.
But I do think that if you go through a process like this and learn healthy conflict, you can at least come apart in a much healthier way than you would have if you weren't practicing the healthy conflict. I can acknowledge in a kind and loving way that we're not, the solution doesn't exist for us. And then, we could be such better co-parents or whatever, even if the ultimate solution is that it's just not going to work. Yeah.
Wow.
Alas. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you also do work with chronic illness and pain, and I'm curious, how did you get into that? And tell us.
Yes. Well, so after my second child was born, I had just really debilitating fatigue. And it took me about 10 years to get a diagnosis. And I now know that this is normal, unfortunately, with rare diseases.
But it takes so long to get a diagnosis.
Yeah, I think the national average is 4 doctors and 7 years if you have an autoimmune disease or a rare disease. So it's unfortunately kind of a mess. But eventually I got diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissues disease. And so I just feel like the universe kind of works this way. All of a sudden, all these people started calling me who had chronic illness problems, and because I was working through kind of a process on how to live with a chronic illness, I felt like I had something to offer them. And so eventually I kind of, started advertising that I do this work. And then I took a training with Jackie Nix up in Canada. She does, you're familiar with the mindfulness-based stress reduction. She does mindfulness-based chronic pain management.
Ah,
So it's a MBSR type model for chronic pain management. So the main thing I do is just kind of, you know, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time, you know? And so it's kind of like accepting that there is no door number 3 where you're going to be well now. This is a chronic illness. It doesn't have a solution. So being fully in reality with how things are, how can you also create a life of meaning, a life that you value, a life that is meaningful to you, even if it's not the life you thought you were going to be living? Yeah.
that's a great way of describing what I call faith. It's
Yes.
that very thing. What I say faith is when you accept that reality is right to be what it is. It's accepting it and then accepting it as meaningful. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, this sucks, but I can learn from it.
Yeah.
I can handle
Right.
it well. I can do the best I can with it. There's some meaning in that. It's,
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl wrote about, even in Auschwitz, you could
Yeah.
find some way. You couldn't control anything. You couldn't control
Yeah.
the probability of dying at
Right.
any
But
moment.
you can control. Yeah.
You could control how you handled it, and that was meaningful, that there was
Yes.
something meaningful and good about
Mhm.
handling that as well as you could, even if it wasn't very well.
Yeah.
That's an important thing. And certainly that would apply in any sort of chronic illness, I would imagine. And
Yeah. 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 So I mean, I kind of say, you can have chronic pain and lay around in your bed all day and do nothing, or chronic illness and lay around and do nothing, or you can have chronic pain and live a life of meaning, but you don't have an option to not have chronic pain.
yeah.
So, given that it is what it is, life, work for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Well,
tragic work. It's kind of like grief work, too.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's, of course, that's universal, that we're all going to die, And
Yep.
there's something about that you could take as sort of, oh, really,
We're not just all going to
down.
die, but we're all going to have people in our lives that die too.
right. We're all going to
Yes.
lose people and we're all going to cause loss.
Right.
Mhm.
And that you could say, well, that's a real bummer. Or you could say, well, there's something beautiful about life then, given that it's fine.
Yes.
Kind of comes with it. It's not a bug, it's a feature,
Yes.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
So, to be able to accept that is a great skill to learn.
Yeah.
So how can people reach you if they, and mention your book again, which I actually, I don't think I had noticed it in your material. So otherwise it would have been in your intro. So,
Oh, okay. Yeah. 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 So it's called Healthy Conflict, Happy Couple. The subtitle is How to Let Go of Blame and Grow Stronger Together. You can find it on Amazon. It's also published by New Harbinger. And so if you're a therapist and you join New Harbinger's, it's free to join their clinicians club, you can get their books 20% off. So you can find me at New Harbinger or Amazon, Healthy Conflict, Happy Couple. And then, as you guys said, I review books on Therapy Book Nook on Instagram. And I also have a therapist Instagram, which is Lisa Gray, MFT.
great.
Yeah. So,
Well, we will put that information in the notes for this episode. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
It has been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Lisa. And anything else that you want to put in there?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, that anybody who is watching this, who's made it through to this part of the interview, if you send me a email that says, I saw the second part, I saw the outro, the stuff after your interview with Lisa Gray, I will actually do something meaningful. You can tell I haven't thought this through thoroughly. But I will send you.
What are we coming up with on
I'll
the spot?
tell you what, on the spot, I will send you a PDF of any one of my books.
Ooh.
I will even send you, if you ask for it, I will even send you a code for a free download of one of my audiobooks. That actually costs money, folks. I have a limited number of those to give.
Wow.
I will give you that if all you have to do is send an email to us. If you go to ctn7.com, you'll see there's a contact form there. Send an email saying, we heard the outro after your interview with Lisa Gray, and just say what it is you'd like. And I will probably be inclined to give it to you, because I'll just be so astonished that anybody actually is hearing this.
There you go.
Not at all astonished, by the way, that people are hearing much of our podcast, because our number's actually quite good. But this is a little test to see, is anybody actually still tuned in
Yeah.
at the end here, because I'm not, when I listen to podcasts, I don't always hang on till the end.
Oh, I do.
Do you? Well,
Oh, yeah.
good. So for those of you who are like want to make sure to get every little bit of your money's worth in the podcast, here
There
you
you
are.
go.
And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.